The kingdom of Vera rested under a dark sky. The air smelled of rain and cold stone. Wind hissed through every gap in the castle walls. From far across the valley, people could see the torchlight burning in the windows of the royal palace. Inside that great stone place, Queen Eleanor walked through her long hall with tired eyes and trembling hands. Her child, the little prince, had not stopped crying for 3 long nights. The sound filled every corner of the palace. It crawled through doors, down corridors, and even out into the courtyards. The nurses had tried songs. The midwives had tried herbs. The old advisors had muttered prayers and burned sweet smoke that made everyone cough. Nothing helped. The queen's son cried and cried until even the walls felt heavy with sadness. Eleanor was not a weak woman. She had ruled her land through drought and war. She was brave, clever, and strong. But in that moment, she looked small before her own child's tears. She lifted the baby in her arms and rocked him again, whispering his name softly. His cheeks were red from crying. His eyes were squeezed tight, his mouth open in another loud wail. The thunder outside seemed to join in the sound. Rain beat against the windows, as if the sky itself were trying to comfort the child. The queen whispered to her chief advisor, "I would give anything for peace tonight." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Anything, even my crown." At last, in her despair, she spoke the words that would soon echo across every town and village. "Whoever can calm my child will have not only gold and land, but also my hand in marriage." The servants froze. The guards stared. Some thought the queen had lost her mind, but the hammering rain swallowed their fears. And the words were carried out of the castle, spread by frightened tongues, growing brighter in every retelling. Far from the palace, in a small and near the edge of the woods, a young man named Ethan Cole warmed his hands by a dying fire. He had traveled all day bringing grain to the city market, and had planned to rest before heading home. But when the innkeeper's son ran in shouting about the queen's promise, everyone stopped eating. They repeated her words again and again, some laughing, some shaking their heads. "Marry the queen," one farmer said, "for calming a baby? That's madness." Ethan smiled quietly. He had always liked strange stories. He had seen the palace from a distance before, shining like a crown on its hill, but he had never imagined setting foot inside it. He thought of his poor clothes, his muddy boots, his cart of half-soaked grain outside in the rain. Still, the thought of that crying baby stayed with him, louder than thunder. While the others went back to drinking and telling jokes, Ethan could not rest. Something inside him stirred a mix of curiosity and simple human kindness. He knew what it was like to lie awake through the sound of a child's cries. His younger sister's children used to stay with him in the summers, and he remembered pacing the floor until they calmed. Not with tricks or songs, but by telling small stories of bravery and laughter. By dawn, the rain had slowed. Mist rolled across the fields like gray smoke. Ethan loaded his cart again and pulled his coat tighter. The palace gates were miles away, but his decision was already made. He would go. Not because he wanted gold or marriage, but because he could not bear the thought of a mother standing helpless before her crying child. When he arrived at the base of the hill hours later, palace guards stopped him at the giant wooden gates. Their armor glistened with raindrops. One of them stared at the soaked man before him and asked, "What business do you have with the queen?" Ethan's voice was calm and steady. "I came to help," he said. The guards exchanged doubtful looks. They had seen rich men, doctors, and wise old scholars come and fail. What could a man in muddy boots do that others had not? Yet the queen's order had been clear. No one was to be turned away who sought to help. And so, the gates opened. The air inside the palace smelled of incense and candle wax. Servants hurried in every direction. Crying of the baby reached Ethan's ears. It was a sound deeper than grief, sharp enough to pierce the heart. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. The weight of the castle, the carved walls, the gold-painted ceilings, all of it, made him feel smaller than he ever had in his life. But then he heard the queen's voice calling from the end of the hall. It was not loud or royal. It was weary and human. When she saw him, she blinked in surprise at his simple clothes and the mud on his sleeves. "You came to help?" she asked quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty," he answered. Her eyes searched his face, something in his tone. Perhaps its honesty stilled her. She nodded and said, "Then show me if you can." And somewhere beyond that long hall, the infant's cries rose again, fierce and endless. as if the world were waiting to see what this quiet stranger would do next. The sound of the crying filled the long halls of the palace as Ethan stepped forward. Servants moved quietly around him, eyes down, afraid to disturb their queen again. The great room smelled of smoke and medicine. Bowls of herbs sat cooling on a table. The floor was scattered with fallen cloths and broken cups. You could see how tired everyone was. The queen's face was pale, her lips pressed tight as she held her son close. The child screamed until his small chest shook. He was red from crying too long. Nurses had taken turns rocking him, but their arms had grown weak, and their voices had worn out long ago. The queen's advisor, an old man with gray hair and round eyes, whispered something about calling a priest. The queen only nodded once but did not move from her spot. Her whole body looked frozen by worry and the heavy weight of duty. When Ethan came near, she looked at him again. His boots left wet marks across the marble tiles. His hands were rough, and his coat still carried the smell of rain. He bowed awkwardly. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "if you will allow it, I will try." The guards near the door shifted their feet. Maid gasped and tried to speak, but the queen raised her hand for silence. Her tired eyes met Ethan's, and she whispered, "Everyone else has failed. What makes you think you can do what they could not?" Ethan thought for a moment. His voice was quiet but sure. "I do not know if I can, but I will not stop until I have tried all I know." The queen watched him for a long breath, and then, slowly, stepped aside. "Very well," she said. "My child is your test." Ethan took off his wet cloak and knelt beside the cradle. The light from the fire flickered over the baby's tiny face. The crying was hoarse now, but still fierce. He reached forward not too quickly and held his hand near the child without touching just yet. He whispered, "It is all right, little one. No one wants to hurt you." His voice was soft and even, steady in rhythm like a lullaby. The baby's cries did not stop, but they changed a little. The sound grew less sharp. The queen's breath caught in her throat as she watched this strange man speaking like a friend to her son. Ethan smiled gently and began to hum. It was not a song anyone in the palace knew. It was an old country tune, simple as sunlight on wheat. He did not have a fine voice, but the low humming wrapped around the baby like a warm hand. The little prince let out one more weak cry and then paused. The sudden silence made everyone in the room hold still. His small chest rose and fell once, twice. Then, for the first time in days, he opened his eyes. The queen bit her lip to keep from gasping. Ethan did not move, kept humming until the baby's eyelids fluttered, and at last, the prince let out a deep sigh and fell asleep. The queen stepped forward, like someone afraid of breaking a dream. She touched her son's cheek and drew back in disbelief. The tiny mouth was closed. His breathing was slow and peaceful. A tear rolled down her face. "How did you do that?" she whispered. Ethan shrugged a little. He was tired, that is all. He just needed to know he was safe. The queen looked up at him as if seeing him for the first time. There was no gold on him, no fine fabric, no weapons, and yet somehow he felt larger than the nobles who had lined up before her throne days ago. "What is your name?" she asked softly. "Ethan Cole," he said. The old advisor, who had been silent till now, leaned toward her and said in a rough whisper, "The oath, your majesty, you made a promise." Those words broke the deep calm of the room like a stone through glass. The queen turned sharply. Her mind had been so full of fear and sleeplessness that she had forgotten the words she had spoken to her court. She had sworn before everyone that whoever calmed her child would be rewarded with more than gold, with marriage itself. Her face went still. The thought rushed through the air like wind through dry leaves. The guards stared, unable to hide their surprise. Ethan bowed his head at once. "Majesty." "I did not come for reward," he said quickly. "Only wanted to quiet the child." But his honesty only made her silence heavier. The queen looked down at the sleeping baby, and then at this man who had done what none of her nobles or healers could do. She saw not magic, not power, but calm kindness and truth. It made her chest ache with a warmth she had not felt since before the storm began. The old advisor spoke again, almost afraid. The vow must be kept. The queen's green eyes met Ethan's. The air around them seemed to wait. A vow is a crown of its own, she said at last in a low voice. It cannot be broken without breaking something more. She stepped closer, her hand resting gently on the cradle.
Yay!
You have given peace to my child, Ethan Cole. You have given peace to my heart. What follows now will change us both. Ethan did not know if her words were blessing or warning. But the quiet that filled the nursery was deep and steady, and in that silence the storm outside finally began to fade. The next morning, the castle was bright with sunlight for the first time in days. The heavy clouds were gone, and the smell of rain still hung in the cool air. Birds gathered on the high windows, chirping as if they had been waiting for peace to return. Inside, the palace workers moved softly, speaking in low voices, afraid to break the rare silence. The sound of the crying baby was gone at last. The queen's son slept peacefully in his cradle, a small smile on his round face. Queen Eleanor had barely slept herself.
Ow.
She sat beside the cradle with her hands folded and her mind full of mixed thoughts.
Ow.
The words she had spoken in her moment of despair the night before echoed in her head again and again. She had promised marriage to the one who could calm her child. She had spoken it before all her court.
Out.
It had not been a quiet wish. It had been an oath that everyone had heard, and now it could not be taken back. She looked across the room where Ethan stood quietly near the doorway. He had been given clean clothes by one of the servants, though they were still simple. He looked like he expected to be told to leave at any moment, yet his calm eyes showed no fear. He had thanked no one for the fine breakfast offered to him because he did not care about food or gold. He only asked once how the baby was doing, and when he heard that the prince still slept soundly, he looked at peace himself. The queen's advisor entered the room with several members of the court behind him. They all bowed deeply, but their eyes burned with curiosity. They had spent the whole night whispering about the queen's promise and what it meant for the kingdom. A queen could not simply marry a common man, who went against every rule and custom they knew. Still, the old man spoke gently. Your Majesty, the vow cannot be undone. Your words were heard by all. The people already talk about it in the city below. Eleanor stood, her long dress brushing the floor. I know, she said quietly. I do not break promises. The crown of Vera stands on truth. One of the younger nobles could not hold back his shock. You cannot truly mean to marry him, he blurted. He is not of noble blood. He has no title, no family of rank. What will the other kingdoms think? The queen looked at him, not in anger, but with the strength she had always carried. They will think that a promise made by the Queen of Vera is a promise kept, she said. Her voice was firm, though her eyes still turned toward the sleeping child. The advisors looked uneasy. The old man bowed again, his face serious. Then the man must be brought before the court, he said. The people must see that you honor your word. That same afternoon, the great hall was filled. The nobles gathered in shining clothes, knights stood tall by the doors, and townsfolk were allowed in to witness the event. Sunlight streamed through colored glass, painting the floor in red and gold. Ethan walked between the guards, his head bowed but his steps steady. He did not look afraid, only unsure of what kind of life he had stepped into. When he reached the front of the hall, he knelt. Your Majesty, he said, I never meant to challenge your oath. I only wanted to help your child. Let me go back to my work. You owe me nothing. But the queen rose from her throne and came down the steps toward him. The crowd watched in silence. You came when no one else could give comfort, she said. You spoke with kindness when others spoke with pride. Gave peace to my son, and I must give truth in return. She turned to the court. My vow remains. The hall filled with whispers. Some people looked delighted. Others looked horrified. What a moment it seemed the queen's guard might step forward to stop her, but her calmness froze them in place. She took Ethan's hand gently. Stand, Ethan Cole, she said. You need not kneel to me. You will stand beside me. Ethan rose slowly. His face was open, honest, still marked by confusion. Majesty, I am no man for thrones, he said softly. I do not know your ways. I only know how to work and speak plain truth. Then you know what many forget, she said. That is enough. The room went silent again. The queen turned toward her people. Let the kingdom see this. A ruler's word is stronger than gold or rank. It is the promise of faith. The nobles bowed low, some out of respect, others out of fear. The old advisor sighed, knowing the shape of history had just changed. Ethan did not yet understand what he had become part of. To him, this was still about the sleeping child in the upper room, the small hand that had clutched his finger before drifting into calm. But to the queen, it was more. It was a sign that even the greatest power must bow before truth and compassion. When the court was dismissed, she looked at Ethan once more. "We will speak again when the evening comes," she said. "There's peace tonight, and that is because of you." Outside, the people of Vera cheered as word spread that the queen had found the man who saved her child. The bells rang across the hills. In every field and house, the story took root, growing brighter and grander with every telling. It was said a humble man with gentle words had quieted not only a crying baby, but also the whole restless heart of a kingdom. The palace was alive with voices, yet the queen felt alone as she walked through her garden that evening. The roses still carried drops of rain from the night before, and the air smelled sweet and cold. Every step she took was heavy with thought. Her promise had become more than words. It was now a turning point for her kingdom. The court had followed her command, but she had seen the fear in their eyes. They did not understand her choice, and maybe she did not fully understand it herself. Eleanor stopped by the small stone fountain and looked at her reflection in the clear water. Her crown felt heavier than ever. She wondered if the people's love would fade once they learned that their queen would marry a man without any title. But then she remembered Ethan's calm eyes and the peace his voice had brought to her crying child. That peace had filled not only the nursery but her heart as well. Inside the castle, Ethan stood in a room he had never dreamed of entering. Fine curtains hung from the high windows, and the smell of fresh bread drifted in from the kitchens. He still felt awkward in the clean clothes the servants had given him. He missed the simple weight of his old work coat. His hands, used to carts and rope, felt useless in this grand place. He looked around and whispered to himself, "This is not my world." Still, when the guards came for him, he followed them without fear. They led him to a smaller hall where Queen Eleanor waited with her advisors. A long table stood between them, covered in papers and a single candle flickering softly. The queen looked at him carefully. "Ethan Cole," she said, "I have called you here because tomorrow the city will expect my word. I must tell them if I will keep my promise." Ethan bowed slightly. "Majesty, I meant no trouble. I never wanted power or reward. If it will bring peace to you and your people, I will leave quietly." The queen shook her head. "You cannot leave. Not now. Your act has already captured every heart in the kingdom. People see you as a sign of hope. I swore before the heavens that I would keep my vow, and I will. But I must know who you are before I tie my life to yours." Ethan met her gaze without pride or shame. "I am no one special, Your Majesty. I am a traveler, a worker, a man who believes that kindness is a power of its own. That is all I am." Eleanor studied him for a moment. His words were simple, yet they held the truth she wished more nobles had known. A quiet strength, humble but unshakable. It was not what the kingdom expected in a husband for their queen, but it was what she herself respected most. "You speak as though the world is simple," she said softly. "But the world I know is not kind. It bends people, breaks them. Even kings and queens are servants to duty." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is why kindness matters most. It is what keeps people standing when all else falls." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the candle flame flickering. Then the queen sighed. "Very well. You will stay in the palace as the court prepares for what must come. Yet I warn you, the days ahead will not be easy. The nobles will test you, and the people will watch every step you take." "I understand," he said. "I will not let your promise bring you shame." The queen nodded, though her eyes softened. There was something in the way he said it, a quiet promise of his own, free of pride. News spread quickly through the corridors that the queen had spoken privately with the man who calmed the royal air. Some servants whispered that he must be blessed. Others feared he had some hidden skill beyond understanding. But those who saw him walk in the palace halls noticed something different. Ethan greeted everyone, the same guards, maids, even the cooks in the kitchen, with gentle respect. No arrogance touched his voice, and no greed colored his eyes. Slowly, even the doubtful began to see why their queen had paused before him instead of sending him away. That night, the queen stood once more at her window. The city below glittered with lights. She could hear faint music from the streets where people were already celebrating. They believed the curse over the palace had broken. She wanted to believe that too. The door opened softly behind her, and a nurse came in carrying the baby. The little prince was awake but quiet, blinking up at the shining lights of the room. Eleanor took him in her arms, pressing her cheek to his soft hair. "Sleep is peace," she whispered. And peace came from a stranger with an honest heart. She looked out the window again and saw Ethan in the garden below, talking quietly with a guard. He bent to pick up a fallen rose from the ground, brushing the dirt off its petals before setting it gently back on the wall where it had fallen. It was such a small act, yet it filled her with warmth she could not explain. Maybe the kingdom needed more than strong walls and fine crowns. Maybe it needed to remember that even an ordinary man could mend what the greatest minds could not. The following day would bring questions, ceremonies, and judgment. But for this quiet evening, the queen allowed herself something rare hope. The sun rose bright over the walls of the palace, golden light spilling across the rooftops and the towers of Viera. Bells rang through the city, their sound soft but full of promise. People filled the streets, waiting to see what their queen would decide. Rumors had spread fast through the night. Some believed she would keep her word and marry the stranger. Others whispered that she would find a way to escape her promise. No one truly knew what would happen when morning came. Inside the palace, Queen Eleanor stood before her mirror as her attendants fixed her gown. The silver threads glistened like frost in the dawn light. She told them to stop when they tried to add jewels to her hair. "No matter what is said today," she told them, "I want to look like a woman, not a crown." She dismissed them with a kind smile and turned toward the window. Below she could see the city square where banners fluttered. The people were waiting. She felt their hopes and fears pressing in from beyond the stone walls. In a smaller room at the other side of the palace, Ethan sat quietly, watching the same morning unfold through a narrow window. He had never worn clothes as fine as these, though they were still simple compared to the silks of the court. A young page came to fetch him, his face wide with curiosity. "The queen waits for you," the boy said. His voice trembled, as if he could not believe the words himself. Ethan stood, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Then let us go," he replied. The great hall was crowded again, brighter than before. Sunlight shone through the high glass windows, flooding the marble floors. The nobles stood in rows, their jewels glittering. The city representatives had been allowed inside as witnesses, their rough hands clutching their hats in silence. And in the center stood Queen Eleanor, calm and proud. She looked at the crowd, and then at Ethan, as the guards led him forward. When he reached her, he bowed low. The queen took a slow breath and turned to face everyone gathered there. "My people," she said, her voice strong but gentle in our time of trouble. "When my child would not rest, and the palace was filled with sorrow, many came offering wisdom and riches. None could bring peace. But this man, a traveler with no title and no wealth, came with nothing but a kind heart. He calmed the heir to our throne and restored peace to this home. Before all of you, I spoke a promise that whoever did this would stand beside me. I will keep that promise." A long silence filled the room after her words. Some of the nobles looked stunned. A few muttered quietly, but the people in the back began to cheer softly at first. Then louder, until the sound filled the great hall. The queen smiled faintly and raised her hand for quiet. Ethan looked up, his face steady, though his heart pounded. "Your Majesty," he said, "you owe me no promise. I am not made for courts or crowns. But I did what any man should do when he sees suffering." The queen stepped toward him. "And that is why you are worthy," she said. "Not because of power or wealth, but because you acted when others turned away." She reached for his hand. "You may refuse the crown, but you cannot refuse the truth that you have changed this kingdom." The old advisor stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Your Majesty, if this is truly your will, then the kingdom must see you joined in unity. Let it be done before them." The queen nodded. "Then let them see that kindness is the might of kings, and that promises are more sacred than pride." The crowd broke into cheers again, louder than before. The people shouted Ethan's name, though he barely knew what to do. The Queen's hand rested lightly in his, and the warmth of it steadied him. In that moment, all the riches of the world meant nothing. He felt only the calm that had filled the nursery that night when the baby finally slept. The ceremony that followed was simple. There were no grand speeches or golden thrones, only two people who had crossed paths at the edge of despair and found peace in honesty. The court bowed as the Queen and Ethan were declared bound together before the people of Vera. Outside, the bells rang again, and the streets erupted into celebration. Later, as the day faded into evening, the Queen walked with Ethan through the same garden where she had stood the night before. The roses glowed red in the sunset. "The people love you already," she said softly. "Do you know why?" Ethan smiled. "'Cause the world needs something true to believe in, not a hero. Just a simple truth." The Queen placed her hand in his. "Then maybe this truth will guide us both." They walked hand in hand through the quiet garden, their steps slow and sure. For the first time in many days, there was no sound of crying, no whisper of fear, only peace. The wind moved gently through the roses, scattering petals like small blessings across the path. That night, the castle slept easily. The baby stirred once, but soon drifted back into calm sleep. The Queen dreamed of laughter and bright days ahead. In every corner of the kingdom, people spoke with warmth about the man who had calmed their queen's child, and reminded them all that kindness could rule as strongly as any sword. In that peaceful time, it felt as if even the stars shone brighter for Viera, guiding the new dawn that would follow.